Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Beyond the Profile podcast. I'm your host, Sheiny. For this 2021 edition, we said peace out, sayonara, see you later to 2020, even though it kind of still feels like 2020. But don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Sorry for bringing that up. I digress. Let's move on. I hope everyone had a safe and wonderful New Year and holiday as well. But let's just get to this wonderful interview. We have a former sous chef that worked in multiple Michelin star restaurants in the Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. area. We go through his passion for cooking, being in the kitchen, moving from studying business in college to wanting to get into the kitchen and being a chef. We talk about the restaurant industry during COVID and so much more. Little tidbit about this episode: when we recorded back in November, he was working at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Albi. He has since moved on from that and moved back to Philadelphia. Not sure what his next steps are, but I'm sure whatever it is, it's going to be amazing. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. There's just so much here to learn and pick up from, so hope you guys enjoy it. See you on the other side. Oh, yeah! Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm joined on the show by an incredible chef who is well known in the cooking scene across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast region. He's worked at a number of Michelin star restaurants and James Beard award-winning restaurants, such as Zahav, Rose's Luxury, and the Dabney. And he is currently the sous chef at the hot new Middle Eastern restaurant in DC called Albi. That guest today is Beau Friedman. Beau, thanks for joining the show, my man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I just kind of want to get started here really quickly because I feel like we just have so much to talk about. But why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up, go to school, etc.?
Yeah, so I was actually born in LA. My parents are from the East Coast. Well, my mom actually was born in Israel and then moved to Brooklyn when she was a kid. My parents grew up on the East Coast. They moved out to LA. They lived there for between 10 and 20 years. My sister and I were born out there. When I was 3 years old, we moved to Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. So grew up in a suburb called Havertown, Delaware County, if anyone's familiar. I went to college at the University of Maryland. I studied business and I minored in Spanish. I got into working in restaurants in high school. I started as a busboy and worked my way up. Sort of went back and forth with working in restaurants and trying to figure out another career, and ended up back cooking.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of want to elaborate a little bit on and get some more information from you for our listeners. But you mentioned yourself that you went to University of Maryland, studied business. You were a busboy before that, doing different things, working in restaurants. When did you really get involved in the kitchen with those different restaurants, and when did you really find out with yourself, like, oh my God, I absolutely love this?
So it's a good question. So I had been working as a busboy in high school for about a year or so, and I worked at this restaurant called Galifte's, which is it's a family-run restaurant. At this point, it's been open for over 40 years. They used to do this thing where they would open up a sort of almost like a separate dining room. They had a patio for the summer, but they also had a separate kitchen out there. So they would rent this huge grill and they would need a few extra cooks for the summer season. So basically the second summer that I was there, my boss asked me if I wanted to learn how to cook. And I liked working in restaurants. I always liked being around restaurants. My dad works for Cisco, which is a food purveyor. I've always liked food. I've always liked eating. When I was working as a busboy, I saw the cooks as the cool guys. They had the kind of fun, cool job. They were always kind of making jokes. When he asked me if I wanted to learn how to cook instead of wiping down tables, it was a no-brainer. At that point, I don't think I would have guessed in a million years that would be my career path. I just kind of went with it. It was something in front of me that sounded better than what I was doing at the time. As that went along, I think naturally I really like to learn, and I'm a really competitive person. So as I started cooking, it happened pretty quickly that I went from learning the basics to wanting to be the best at the things that I was doing. that led me down a path of curiosity and trying to learn more and more. But still, I never really thought it as a serious profession. I would think the first sort of moment for me when I saw the like broader culinary world, if you will, was my sister got me a copy of Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. And reading that, I was able to relate to the parts that I could relate to after only having worked in the kitchen for about a year at that point. I think for the most part, what stuck with me at the time were the snippets of how Anthony Bourdain would talk about the great chefs. And in his words, he was talking about chefs who were sort of more accomplished than him and went down a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just never thought about the actual culinary universe. I was thinking about being a cook as a job that I was doing at the time. And that led me down a path to sort of just do some Googling, like, okay, what are the best restaurants? Why are they the best restaurants? And that's a rabbit hole that I probably am still going down today, but that really just expanded my worldview. And with my curious nature led me to try to better myself. And the first sort of step that I took from there was I started staging, which stage is a French term. We use it in the kitchens to mean essentially working for free. And it can mean a lot of different things. You can be an actual stagiaire, which is like someone who goes to one of the best restaurants in the world and works unpaid for months at a time. Or what's a lot more common is staging for a job. So it's like you'll have a working interview essentially. So any kitchen job, you do a 1-day stage at least. And it's actually something that's pretty unique to cooking that is really valuable because you can't see everything, but you can see whether somebody is for real or not for real. And you can also get a gauge for their attitude. Anyway, I started staging 1 day a week at a restaurant called Tango, which has since closed. It was another suburban restaurant, but the chef had worked at a restaurant called Le Bec Fin, which for years and years was like the best restaurant in Philadelphia, one of the best French restaurants in the country. So, and the food that they were doing wasn't anything crazy. And I would just go in on Sundays and like hang out with the sous chef. I actually never met the head chef because I was only ever there on Sundays and he was off. But I would hang out with the sous chef, and I was like, 17, 18, and he would teach me how to make like risotto, make hollandaise, and I learned a couple things, and it was a cool first experience of something better. And I think it's something I'm proud of my 17, 18-year-old self for staging on my day off in the mornings, even if it was just for a few hours. I think it was a good first window into sort of a better kitchen.
No, that's super interesting too. One of the things that I have done in the past through my career is reach out to people that I am extremely interested in and ask them, hey, can I work for free? Mm-hmm. And the fact that you guys have your own word for it is just incredible. Mm-hmm. How long does that usually last to staunch like that usually? So
it really depends. I think most good employers, I would say, want to pay people who are doing a good job. If you say have no cooking experience whatsoever and just want to learn, but you're not really valuable enough to merit like a paycheck, I think that's a situation where I could validate or justify having someone stage for a period of time, maybe even if it's just like 1 day a week, doing it for a long time. But I would say if you're just trying to learn a few things, or if you want a position, you shouldn't really be staging for more than like a week for free.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that definitely makes sense. And you mentioned that you were staging for like that week, but you were 17, 18 years old, something like that. That's before college. So you realized that you had this love for cooking before you got to school. When did you really dive into the fact that, wait a sec, I'm actually pretty good at this? Was it in college? Were you making food for like your roommates or friends or back home with family?
So I had a really hard time letting myself see cooking as a valid career path.
Yeah.
I didn't really have an example to follow. Everybody that I knew was going down a traditional path, and certainly I was going down a traditional path as well. I felt like I had to go to a 4-year college and get a sort of normal degree, which is something that I was never super fired up about. Even in high school, before I was interested in cooking, I thought that I might want to go to music school. I was really into playing music in high school, really involved with that, and that was something that I wanted to do, but also shied away from because I thought it didn't make sense as a career path. So, I got to college and my experience was fine. I got to study abroad, which was great, and I got to learn Spanish, which was great. Like that is easily the biggest takeaway for me from going to college. But my heart was never fully in what I thought that I was choosing to do with my life. I went into school undecided, which I thought was going to be pretty common. And then I got to school and realized half the kids seemed to know that they were going to be engineers or whatever they were doing, which I think is maybe just my Delaware County, Pennsylvania worldview, that I just didn't know that that was what people do. But, I sort of fell into business degree. I really like math, so I justified it that way, and it felt safe, and I felt like I could do any number of different things. I wasn't like pigeonholing myself. And while I was in school, I got some more cooking experience. So after my first year of college, I ended up getting a job at a restaurant called Nectar, which was and still is pretty much the best restaurant in the suburbs of Philly. Not like there's a bunch of great restaurants in the suburbs of Philly, like there aren't, but the guy Patrick is a really talented chef. He had worked at a restaurant called Le Cirque in New York, which was like one of this like opulent, great French restaurant of New York City. And he just knew a ton. It was a serious kitchen. It was super overwhelming. From time to time, I think about the first month that I worked there, and I just thought that there was no way that I would ever be able to do it. It was really, really difficult. And now I realize so much of it is just showing up day after day and having a good attitude. But at the time, it was incredibly challenging, and then was really rewarding. I mean, I was there that first summer. It was, a 3-month summer break from college, and I learned a ton, came out the other side feeling, I don't think that I was ready to declare it my career path, but I was feeling really energized about cooking. That was then I took a pause with cooking. And after my junior year of college, I took an internship doing like inbound logistics for a company, and then went back to school for my senior year. And then after I graduated, I started doing data analysis for this industrial optics company, which was cool. And everybody that I worked with was really nice. And, I got really good at Excel, which is cool. And I've forgotten like everything that I learned, which really pisses me off. But I'm promising myself that I'm going to get back there one day, because it's certainly like, as I want to be a restaurant owner, and those skills are really important. But I was less than a year after graduating and just wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And the cooking thing had been in the back of my head for a while. And I just had a moment where I realized that I just needed to give it a shot, do it for real, put my heart into it. And I told myself I would do it for a year and check in with myself. And that was 7 years ago. So.
No, and one of the best things about that is you're betting on yourself. You realize at a young age that you can take those risks and go into it and give yourself a year and say, okay, I'm going to try this one thing that I absolutely love. I mean, you were even just saying like you got working at that data analysis company, you learned Excel, but you could tell in like your tone that like, okay, Excel's great, but that's not what I love. I don't love going to work for Excel, And the fact that you took that risk and wanted to try that out for a year is pretty incredible. What restaurant was that you tried out?
So that was Zahav, which is a restaurant that I really wanted to work at for a long time. I remember, I think I was in high school, and Philly Mag every year comes out with this like 50 best restaurants of Philadelphia list, which is, we don't have to talk about the accuracy and also just lists in general. I don't have to give my feelings about lists, but
Hmm.
I remember seeing Zahav as the number one restaurant, and I didn't know anything about it at the time, but I knew that it was Hebrew, and I Googled it and saw that it was an Israeli restaurant. And my mom is from Israel, and like I didn't grow up with a ton of Israeli culture or food in the house, but still seeing that the best restaurant in Philadelphia was serving Israeli food was something that piqued my interest. And that was, I mean, I think I might have been 18 when I saw that, but it was always in my head. And I ended up using my connections. The chef who I'd worked for at Nectar got me essentially a phone call and a stage at Zahav, and I staged while I was still working the office job. And they offered me a job, and I just said yes. I didn't negotiate money or like anything. I just
Oh, wow.
was ready to do it, and just kind of hit the ground running. And it was brutal. I had worked, working at a place like Nectar, I certainly learned a lot, and it was really hard at the time. And also, I was an hourly employee working, like 40-hour weeks. And from day one at Zahav, it was like 60-hour weeks.
No.
And it's a huge difference. Like the first time that you do that, now I'm used to it as much as anyone's body can be used to those kind of hours. But at the time it was brutal. And that first month at Zahav was every bit as brutal as my first month at Nectar, which is now I realize a sign of serious growth that happens really quickly and is really difficult in the moment. And I was honestly shocked at how quickly things moved when I was there. I had a good base level of ability at the time for somebody, my age, and somebody pretty new to the industry. I think I had the tools to go into a place like that and succeed, and still was not ready for that, a restaurant like that, and wasn't ready for a restaurant where so much is on the line every night, a restaurant
Yeah.
that's like defending a very serious reputation and some really serious accolades. And I kind of just put my head down and focused and worked really hard, and was just surprised at how quickly I was able to move up. I became a sous chef there after being there for a year, which is kind of crazy.
Oh, wow.
And it's partly how quickly things moved there. It was very, very fast paced, and it was also the kind of place where they really recognized quickly whether somebody was worth investing in or not. And it was kind of, you move through the stations, and the second station you get to was sort of make or break. It was really difficult, and you would either succeed or you would probably quit or get fired. And if you made it past there, then you're on the sous chef track. And I'm really grateful to have been able to move up quickly. I look back a little self-consciously because I was a sous chef after a year, and certainly had some big holes in my culinary knowledge, like at large, and still knew the restaurant really well and knew the food that we were doing really well, and was able to be an effective leader. And I'm really grateful to have gotten management and leadership experience so early on in my career. And I think you learn so much about the big picture when you're in a leadership role. And still it happened really fast. But so basically I told myself long story short, I told myself I was going to check in after a year, and after a year I was being promoted, and there was no second thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, you just said so much there, and there's so many questions that I have that I want to unpack.
Mhm.
Someone that obviously doesn't come from the cooking industry,
Mhm.
and a lot of the listeners too, they don't really come from that industry all that much. People just love going to different restaurants,
Mhm.
experiencing the atmosphere,
For
the
sure.
food, everything like that. We don't really understand what's behind the scenes, what's going on in the kitchen. Couple things I really want to ask you quickly, because I really enjoy this stuff, is, you said that you were a sous chef after a year. Well, what is that first step? What kind of work are you doing before you're a sous chef?
Mhm.
Um, what is that? And then I kind of want to go over what those holes were that you had to learn because it was such a quick transition, and
Mhm.
what sort of things you learned at that time.
Mhm. Yeah. So I would say at any restaurant, the steps to becoming a sous chef are learning all of the different stations. So kitchens are set up differently, but most kitchens, there's a cold side station, which we sometimes use French terms like garde manger, but it's, you're making plated dishes, cold dishes. That's usually where people start. It's a really good entry point because you have to be really organized, you have to be really clean, and you have to be fast because you're not cooking things, so you can't multitask, so you just have to be fast. And then, so at Zahav, for example, then I moved to a station that was doing like hot meze, which are like small plates. And then from there, you would move to the saute station, which is cooking on cooking things on burners, in pans. And then from there, you move to the meat station or the grill station where you're like actually cooking like the proteins, meat, fish, the big ticket items. So usually as a cook, you move through those stations and then you get to a point where you know how to do everything. And then it's a question of maturity and being able to step into a leadership role. And my boss, so Mike Solomonov, who is the chef owner of Zahav, is to this day the best mentor that I've ever had. I didn't realize at the time how unique the situation was. I sort of expected that all really successful chefs would be like him, and they're not. He taught me, I learned so much about cooking in his kitchen, whether it was directly from him or somebody else, and learned so much about things that have nothing to do with cooking. Like, he taught me how to lead people, how to be positive, and I remember being a cook, knowing how to work all the different stations, and getting a little frustrated because I wasn't moving up. Even though I went into it not thinking that I would be a sous chef after a year, once you're there for sort of 8 months, 9 months, and you feel like you can work all the stations better than some of the other people, and felt really ready to be a sous chef. And also I had no idea what that actually looked like and no idea what that actually meant. And I remember getting coffee with Mike and with this guy, Dean, who was the sort of head sous chef at the time. And they basically laid it out there for me. They're like, you do a great job. And also, if you're having a bad day, like, it shows, and your product is good, but you might seem pissed off. And I'm like, is Beau going to quit today? I remember some of the things from this conversation vividly, like 6 years later. They showed me in that conversation that I just had to essentially grow up, and that being a leader meant never really showing it when you're flustered, when you're mad, when you're upset. It means going in and no matter what happens, and every day in restaurants, crazy things happen and huge problems come up, and you just have to be a brave face, and it wasn't something that happened in a day, but I was able to sort of mature really quickly because it's what was asked of me and what I needed to do to get to where I wanted to be. Then I found myself, working the bread station, which was at Zahav, was where a sous chef would work, and you would run the kitchen from that point. So that's the path to becoming a sous chef. And then from there, there are people who are hired into management roles, and that's sort of a whole other topic. And I mostly throughout my career have worked my way up. The Dabney is the only place where I started as a sous chef. And then what was the second part of that question? I'm trying to remember.
No, it was talking about those holes within that year that you kind of realized that you had after becoming a sous chef.
So, that's still a work in progress. There's so much to learn with cooking. I ended up leaving Zahav after being there for 2.5 years, which was a hefty amount of time, and I learned a lot, and I was able to get some pastry experience in my last 6 months there, which was a really valuable experience, and a lot of sort of savory chefs don't take the time to do that. And from there, I went to a restaurant called Cure in Pittsburgh, which was a lot smaller. Zahav does about 240 to like 300 dinners a night, whereas Cure would do between like 40, and the busiest night was like 120. So seeing a kitchen that does small volume was really eye-opening, and I knew that I wanted that experience. I knew that there were things to learn, and some of the biggest things that I learned there had to do with, I would say, like, the world of meat. The chef Justin Severino is a really talented butcher and charcuterie maker, so I was able to to get my hands on making things like, some pâtés, charcuterie, and also just cooking meat and fish in a way, like with the attention of detail that you can do in a restaurant that small.
Mhm.
And still, I left there because there's a whole world more to learn, and I went to Rose's, which was my first experience at a Michelin-starred restaurant, and there was so much to learn there, and they do a really good job of the organizational aspects of running a restaurant, and also just all the little fine dining touches of being in a Michelin-starred restaurant. And then went to the Dabney, where I learned a ton. I mean, it is a really difficult place to work, and also that's probably the place since Zahav where I was able to fill in the most gaps. I mean, I learned a ton of butchery, like sort of large scale butchery, like breaking down, like butchering half a pig, like knowing what to do with like
Oh my
a
God.
huge piece of meat like that, or whatever the product might be. And also just learned so much about vegetables there. And like I got a great basis for that at a place like Zahav, where the food is really vegetable heavy. And also being at a restaurant like the Dabney that almost exclusively uses produce from the region and like local farmers was really eye opening, and was the first time that I had seen that sort of volume or such a range of beautiful produce. But I think to circle back to the question, there's always so much to learn. I try to identify the things that I really want to learn and things that don't matter as much to me, but I really pride myself on being a well-rounded chef. And even at the Dabney, I spent time being the person making the bread every day. And it's like, bread is not my passion. I'm not going to open a bakery. I'll probably never work in a bakery, but it's important to have a basic understanding of making bread. Same thing with pastry. Things like butchery, that's obviously like a much more important skill if you're a savory chef. But there's so many things to learn everywhere, and that's sort of why I've kept moving, going to a different restaurant, learning something else, because at the end of the day, there's only so much you can learn at one place and only so much that one chef can teach you. And that's not a knock on anyone that I've worked for. It's a reality. And, I'm always going to be trying to patch up holes in my knowledge. I feel more well-rounded as a chef than I ever have in this moment, which makes sense. And also, you never stop learning.
Yeah, of course. And, just going off that, when you were talking about never stop learning, you're learning these leadership qualities and you're learning how to solve problems so quickly that normal people don't really come across. If you're sitting at a desk job or something like that, punching in Excel, more than likely you're not going to have that leadership role. There aren't going to be a lot of problems that you solve unless you're probably in a managerial role. But you are learning things on a day-to-day basis that you've probably seen a different problem every other week.
Yeah.
And those are things that are extremely valuable to not only what you're doing in refining your own skill, but just for life in general. And, one of the things that I kind of want to go through in terms of the restaurants that you worked at is learning that leadership and getting to a point where you are now working at these Michelin star restaurants. Go into detail as to what is a Michelin star restaurant? How do you become that? 2, how did you get into those sorts of restaurants? Because that is something that is on your resume that is amazing, to say the least.
Yeah. So I have mixed feelings about Michelin. The Michelin guide is only out in select places, select cities in the world. In the US, there's Michelin in New York, it's in Chicago, it's in California, it's in DC. And that's it. It's obviously not super representative of the whole country. DC is the only place where I've worked that has the Michelin guide. As a Philadelphian, I certainly have feelings about that. I mean, Zahav is a really important restaurant. It's won a ton of James Beard Awards. It's no lesser than any Michelin-starred restaurant that I've worked at, But it's kind of the world we live in. We also, I think, like a sort of a better metric, or just a different metric that's more all encompassing, is talking about James Beard Awards, because it's representative of the whole country.
Yeah.
But all that aside, you get into different kitchens off of your resume and off your work ethic. You don't have to have a strong resume. You have to get your foot in the door, which usually is pretty easy. Most restaurants are really receptive to somebody coming in and working for free for a day.
Yeah.
There's always, every restaurant is always shorter staffed than they would like to be. There's always a lot to do. So it's pretty easy to get your foot in the door. And also the chef community, when you get into the top tier of restaurants, is really close knit. There's always a connection. There's always somebody who knows somebody. You're never very far removed from another successful chef. And it's really easy, especially having connections, especially someone like Mike at Zahav. It's like he knows everybody. If I wanted to get in somewhere through him, I could. And also you just make connections as you go along.
I mean, all of that is extremely interesting. And now you're at Albi.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that I'm kind of realizing in terms of, what the common denominator is of some of these restaurants is a lot of the restaurants that you've worked at are very Mediterranean based.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of Israeli food or Mediterranean food. Do you kind of look for that type of cuisine because you're interested in it, or you're maybe a better cook at making those types of dishes? Or is it something that is based off of the head chef or how they go about the process of working through their kitchen, things like that?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I want to cook food that resonates with me, and also I don't want to. So I don't know if overextend myself is the right way to put it, but like I haven't made like Asian food, for example, and a lot of chefs are really fired up about doing that. It's not something that's part of my story. I love eating it. I don't think it's like something that resonates with me as a chef, or something that I would like be able to really add to the story of, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's like the food of the Mediterranean region is food that I'm familiar with, and like a food that just feels natural. I think it just feels natural when it comes down to it. And some of the places I worked at strafe in that. I mean, the Dabney is like more American. Rose's Luxury is a little more eclectic, and certainly has some of like Asian influence, a lot of different influences. But for the most part, it's just food that feels natural to me and sort of my journey and my story. Albi is the first place since Zahav that is like, really Middle Eastern, which I think I was kind of burnt out on cooking that food when I left Philly and when I left Zahav, but it's been really exciting to be doing that again.
No, that's really interesting. And kind of just moving along from that, the fact that you are at Albi, and when did you start at Albi again?
So I started in July, and it's been an interesting experience. I mean, we're living and working during a pandemic, and
exactly.
I didn't really start there with any sort of agenda. I mean, honestly, I left the Dabney and I took about a month off, and Albi was hiring. It was sort of the only sort of, in my mind, like valid place for me to work, like valid restaurant that was hiring. And the chef, Michael Rafidi, actually did a pop-up, like a preview dinner of his restaurant at the Dabney while I was working there. And I was really impressed by his food and the way that he conducts himself in a kitchen. So all of that said, I started there just kind of helping out, just in a line cook capacity. So I was kind of taking what was available at the time. They didn't really have space for another manager, so I was working, a 40-hour work week, and since then things have shaken up a little bit, and now I'm in a sous chef role, which is only, I've been a sous chef there for the last month, maybe a little longer than a month. So I'm still in a pretty introductory role as a sous chef, and there's still a couple people above me. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been good being in there. It's a really good team. It's a really good energy. And the food is really exciting. And I didn't know how much I missed cooking Middle Eastern food, because it's really unique and does have a real place for me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obsessed with Middle Eastern food, so I'm probably going to come there
very
soon.
For sure.
But But I think one of the major themes that we've kind of hit on today is the fact that there's a lot of problem solving and you need to be quick on your feet to make sure that you've overcome anything that comes your way. And I think one of the bigger things that have come the restaurant industry's way has been COVID. And you started at Albi in July. That's very mid COVID time. So talk a little bit about what kind of these close downs of these restaurants have impacted the restaurant industry and what sort of solutions you guys have done specifically at Albi, or you can go a little bit further and talk about the broad restaurant industry on how to overcome those issues that have come your way.
Yeah, so it's been really difficult. I think I consider myself pretty lucky that I'm at this point in my career during all of this. I think had I been a few years down the road and actually been a restaurant owner, it would be really scary. And luckily, I'm not responsible for anything like that right now because a lot of restaurants are closing. Like a lot of really good restaurants are closing, and everyone's just kind of doing what they need to do to survive. And that has meant different things for different places. I think different restaurants are more easily suited to sort of pivoting to doing takeout business or whatever it is to stay afloat. And I started at Albi right when they opened up indoor dining, which has been a really tough thing to navigate. In a kitchen role, I don't have to navigate it as much as the people in the front of the house, but it's been tough. And I think you ask about solutions. I think the solutions that we have had so far as an industry at large are pretty temporary. We're trying to make somewhere near the amount of money that we would if there weren't a pandemic happening, and to some success and to some failures. And we're just really all trying to stay afloat. Everyone's trying to have a job, to stay busy, and just to kind of get through this and hope for a better day.
Yeah, exactly. And you're kind of located in Navy Yard, so there is a pretty larger area, I guess, for outdoor seating. Do you guys still do that then? Or?
Yeah. So that's been most of the business for dinner service. Typically on weeknights, most of the guests dine outdoors, and on weekends when there's a much higher demand, it's full it's as full as it can be in the dining room, and then full outside. And right now we have some heaters at the restaurant outside, and are looking at some other ways to continue outdoor dining through the colder months. But it's all it's
a crapshoot.
Yeah, and it's like sort of bigger versions of the problem solving on the fly that we do regularly. It's just doing that on a more large scale level with like huge ramifications.
Yeah, definitely. And when I think about this sort of time that we're going through a little bit, as a guest, as a consumer that loves to go to different kitchens and restaurants and things like that, do you think guests will see a change maybe once after, like, let's just say that COVID is done tomorrow? Do you think there will be like some implementations and changes that we will see that maybe restaurants will take in further down the road, and the things that they have learned from COVID, they will say to themselves, okay, this was a great solution or a plan during this time. We're going to continue to implement that.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to say. I've thought about, something that I've thought about on a personal level is just, I'm somebody who gets sick usually with, a cold several times a year. And I've noticed that wearing a mask, I haven't gotten sick at all, whether, COVID or anything else. And that's sort of, I don't know that people will be wearing masks forever in restaurants, but certainly during the cold season, during flu season, you have a lot of people not only working closely together, but also interacting with, hundreds of people a week who come into the restaurant. And that's something that I've thought about, whether it's wearing a mask or sort of the ways that we've thought more consciously about how we interact with people, or maybe can contract something from someone else could permeate a future post-pandemic life. I think something that I've been thinking about recently is how many restaurants have seen that they are capable of doing takeout business in addition to their regular business, and especially looking forward as restaurant owners are less certain about their profits as they have been in the past and might want to just strike while the iron is hot. I think you might see more places continuing to offer takeout that would probably never have dreamed of doing it in the past. That's really what I can speak to. I can't really speak as much to the guest interaction because I'm not really on that end at this moment.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I wanted to also ask you based off of that takeout way is, you as a chef, there's a very artistic kind of mindset behind that to prepare and present your food. Does that get compensated a little bit during this time? Maybe not for the people that are sitting in and dining, but I'm assuming, I don't know if Albi does a lot more takeout. Does that takeout get kind of overpowered where the presentation, the preparation doesn't really matter as much?
I mean, do you want my politician answer or my actual answer?
Let's go actual.
No, I'm just joking. I think it's not a secret that putting food in a to-go container is different from putting food onto a plate. We're gonna make it look as nice as it can in a to-go container, and also it's not the same thing. And at the end of the day, something that's going to be in somebody's bag, in the backseat of their car, and then going home. I don't think the presentation matters as much, between me and you. But yeah, it's certainly different. People have made, in sort of the cooking Instagram world at the beginning of the pandemic, there were certainly jokes about, making fine dining, like tweezer food, as they call it, because people plate with like mini tweezers, like in containers. But yeah, it's definitely it's a whole different ball game, and it can be really tough to juggle. I mean, our takeout business during dinner service is hit or miss. I mean, we only offer these family dinners, so a more large format meal. Like, people can't just order anything a la carte because that would just be a mess. So we order these. We are doing these family dinners, and on average, we might just sell a few on a weeknight, and then on weekends there's definitely more demand for it, but it can also be pretty disruptive to dinner service. So we might max out at 12 to 15 family dinners, because at the end of the day, the dinner service shouldn't be derailed by doing this additional takeout business. But it's certainly been interesting.
Well, I mean, Beau, you've clearly found something that you love, that you're happy with, you're passionate about it. What sort of things, and you've taken the risk necessary to find that, I think, which is extremely admirable. What sort of advice would you give to an aspiring chef? It could be, I mean, you could either answer it during COVID or after, like, it doesn't matter, but what would your advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we'll talk about a normal world, because
let's do that.
Makes me feel happier.
Exactly.
I think somebody getting started in cooking, it's really important. I mean, it's really important to work hard. It's really important to have a good attitude. I think attitude is huge, and I never would have thought it was as important as it is. And you can have all the talent in the world as a cook, and if you can't get along with people, I mean, it's a team sport. Like, cooking in restaurants is a team sport. And if you have a bad attitude, you're going to be pissed off all the time, and you're never going to get anywhere. If you have those things, a good work ethic, a good attitude, you just need to put yourself in the right places. I think it can be really easy to justify maybe going to a kitchen that seems like a small challenge, but not an overwhelming challenge. And there's a place for that. And also, I think if you really want to be really good or want to be great, you got to take some big jumps. And the beauty of it, I mean, I didn't know this, when I was younger, but the beauty of it is there's some great kitchens that would be happy to have a 17, 18-year-old kid coming in and learning and working for free. And that is, like, to circle back, that's an instance where I would totally justify somebody working for free. If I had known that when I was in college at Maryland and like daydreaming about becoming a chef, that I could just go to one of the best restaurants in the city and just like ask them if I could work for free as an extra hand on, Fridays or Saturdays for a few hours. Like I would have done it in a heartbeat, and it would have been a really rewarding experience. And I think those opportunities are out there. It's all about just reaching out to people and looking for somebody to say yes. And also something that chefs talk about that has stuck with me is sort of the power of saying yes as a cook, or the importance of saying yes rather. It's like somebody's giving you an opportunity. If somebody asks you if you want to help out with something and it's intriguing to you, just say yes. Like you can kind of think about it later. Just kind of, if something feels energizing, just say yes and just do it. And that might mean you're working a full schedule and then somebody asks you to help out with a special dinner that's like on your day off, but you think it would be cool. Like just saying yes to that and doing it. And I think mostly just really trying to get yourself in the best kitchen that will have you. It's, people talk about how you don't want to be the smartest person in the room because you don't have anything to learn. Like you want to go into a kitchen where everybody knows more than you, especially early in your career. And that obviously gets to be more difficult the further you go along and you get to a point where you transition into the teacher. We're learning every day, but at a certain point, you're going to be teaching more than you are learning. But until you get to that point, it's just getting into places where you're going to grow and you're going to learn, and it's going to be really difficult.
No, that's great. And I mean, you've said it multiple times in this interview how much you love to learn, and I think that within itself is admirable that you're taking that to the kitchen, and you're telling people, whoever are aspiring chefs in the future, to be open about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, though, this has been an amazing interview, and you've been an awesome guest. I just have a few final questions for you. They could be quick hitters if you want.
Yeah.
If not, you can extend. Totally up to you. But before I hit those final questions that I ask everyone, I do have one question for you. Do you get home after cooking and cook more for you and your partner?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Okay.
When I have the energy for it, I really love cooking at home. And sometimes it's really grounding to do and remember the things that you really love about it in a totally stress-free environment. But for the most part, get home at 1 a.m.
Yeah, that's tough.
Put a frozen pizza in the oven. It's pretty. Some people might be shocked at the. I for context, I ate Buffalo Wild Wings last night after
There you go.
Really difficult work week. So
that's awesome. Well, you're normal, just like us. So, all right. So hitting on these final questions, then again, they could be quick. You can elongate. Totally up to you. But looking back on your freshman year of college self, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
I think I would tell myself to trust my gut. I think it's something that I still struggle with, but have gotten a lot better at recognizing, just sort of following my gut instincts. It's like recognizing that your instincts are good and that you just need to follow them. I think certainly when I was a freshman, when I was 18, 19, I did a lot of things that I think I probably knew weren't the right things to do. And that's probably been my biggest takeaway, between then and now, and is something that I would have really benefited hearing from my future self.
Yeah. No, and I can totally empathize with that. What was the worst advice you ever took and executed on?
I don't know. I'm like pretty stubborn, so I don't know that I taken that much bad advice. I probably just made bad decisions on my own.
Okay.
But one thing that stands out to me, I had a pretty disheartening experience when I was in my last semester of college, where I didn't know what I was doing, and I was looking around at all these people who already had jobs lined up heading out of school, and was feeling really anxious about that. And I ended up meeting with a career advisor, and I tried to sort of flesh out my story, if you will, with her, and told her that I was really seriously thinking about owning a restaurant, like working in restaurants. And she really discouraged me from that. And she told me that I should go work, get a job in the business field for 3 years. And then if I still wanted to cook or whatever, then I could go to like culinary school or whatever it is. And it just was pretty whack advice. And it made me really sad at the time. And I didn't like take her advice, but still it was a really discouraging moment for me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you didn't take that advice because it sounded like you did the opposite. So that's great.
For sure.
What do you do to sharpen your sword and refine your craft?
Just trying to work for different chefs who have things to teach me, and also doing some, independent study. I mean, I moved a few months ago, and it's like my partner was shocked at how many cookbooks I had once they're like actually we're putting them into boxes. I love reading cookbooks. I love just learning new things. Like this summer I got a book about Spanish charcuterie, which has been really cool. And I haven't had like the time or space to really like practice any of those things, but it's something that I'm really fired up about in the moment. So, just identifying things that I don't know and just trying to learn them. And like, there's so much to learn with cooking. Like it's overwhelming, but every time that I do something new and actually, pull it off, which usually it's tough at first and you get better and better, but it always feels super validating.
That's awesome. Well, Beau, thank you again. I want to acknowledge you for just a quick second for, describing and telling me everything about your life and how you've taken that leap and taken those risks. I think it's extremely admirable and something that I will definitely take out of this interview where, you have gone to school to do one thing, but you always had that love and passion for something else. And you have 100% put your action and like all of your pieces in that. And I love that you're just going straight for it, head down, and you're willing to learn in the process. So thank you again, Beau.
Yeah, of course. It's been fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And last thing, where can people find you? Social media, website?
I'm on Instagram. It's at Beau Money, Beau Problems 11.
Beau Money, Beau Problems
is a little maybe not the most professional. I don't have like a professional chef Beau Friedman Instagram, but that's where I don't really post that much. And honestly, a lot of being a sous chef is sort of toiling in obscurity before you have your own place. It's kind of making stuff happen behind the scenes. So, but that's where I'm at on social media. I don't really post a lot of pictures of food. So if you're looking for that, I'm sorry. I'm just usually a little too busy for it, but
he's a good follow. He's a good follow.
Yeah, there's some funny meme reposting. So.
There we go. Well, Beau, thank you again, man. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed the episode and picked up on a few different things in terms of how Beau found his passion and really jumping into the culinary industry and becoming a chef in general. I mean, there's just so many different things to hit on. But again, hope you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe, rate, and review. I just want to thank you all for listening in 2020 when we launched back in, what was it, October or so? Thank you so much, really, from the bottom of my heart. Just anyone that has reached out or listened, any of that, like, it really does mean a lot. And I hope you guys can continue to comment, review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. All of that is extremely helpful, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you again. Hope you all had a wonderful new year, and let's make 2021 the best.